These over here are the M4 Max MacBook Pros 16-inch. This one is the only 48GB version, whereas this over here is the 128GB version. So this is maxed out M4 Max, and the upgrade from this to that costs $1,000. And I'm very fortunate to be able to test both of these and actually figure out if the 128GB RAM upgrade is worth it. And here's the thing, the benchmarks are not telling you the whole story. So here's my 2 cents if you should be upgrading or if it's right for you to upgrade to the 128GB. This video is brought to you by Asus ProArt P16, the ultimate creator laptop that doesn't just look good, but lets you bring the workstation performance anywhere. Professional 16-inch 4K OLED display, AMD Ryzen 9 AI CPU, and NVIDIA RTX 4070 GPU, and that's just the beginning. Go check out our whole playlist about this device and the full overview in the video description below. Thanks Asus ProArt for sponsoring this part of the video. By the way, if you're looking at this video and thinking, these laptops are $9,000 plus, like how am I even gonna be able to afford something like that as a creator? Well, there's good news for you. There's PC build guides in the video description below. This channel is actually PC, oriented, and we make PC tech for creators. So if you're looking to build yourself a best bang for buck creator PC with a lot less than what these cost, then there's some videos in the video description below. And if you're enjoying videos like this, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. And number one reason that you might think it's worth upgrading this is the actual benchmarks for Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere Pro, video editing, Davinci Resolve, and 3D applications. I've actually ran all of the benchmarks on the 128GB version as well. I don't actually see any performance difference between these two models, and that is because the benchmarks, most of the benchmarks, what you see people use on the internet, are built in a way that it wouldn't require a lot of RAM. You don't want the RAM to be the bottleneck to actually show you the CPU or GPU performance. So they've built the benchmarks in a way that the RAM wouldn't really have to be an issue there, but not everything. Let's look through these programs then. Photoshop, when I'm running the benchmarks, as you can see, the difference is within margin of error and both of them perform exactly the same, and that's exactly because Photoshop doesn't use as much RAM. And if you're wondering if you need more RAM for your Photoshop, workflow, then I'll probably say 99% of the people, no, you don't need the 128GB version. You're not going to see this there. But there are some specific workflows where you might need more RAM when you're working with extremely large photos and lots of layers and multiple projects open at the same time. But even at that point, I think most likely you don't need more RAM. Let's look at Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic, even though there's no benchmark, uses the hardware a little bit differently. You can actually utilize a little bit more RAM, and when doing multi-photo putting together or exporting or putting a massive panorama together, then it can start to use a lot of RAM. So at that point, I'd say probably for you there. But if you're doing just simple photo editing and just moving some of the faders, and even as a wedding photographer, for example, if you're editing a lot of photos on the go, I wouldn't say that the 48GB is going to be an issue for you. But if you're doing a lot more complex, massive canvases and so on, then the 228GB, I would say you might start to see a little bit of a difference there. Moving on to Premiere Pro, the difference is basically nothing at all. As you can see, both of them run within margin of error, but that is not all exactly that. Now, Premiere Pro is something that we use here a lot, and I've done a lot of tests on these. So if you want to see the timeline performance live that we did, where we tested a lot of different codecs on this, you can see that there. And I even did an export test on Media Encoder to see exactly the same project. How would it export? Is there actually a difference? And there was an actual difference. Now, it was only a couple of seconds, but the 128GB was faster. It was using and utilizing more RAM because it had the ability to do so. Now, I would say that if you're editing more complex than just a simple, just cut the footage and then export it out, if you like to have effects and more layers and different codecs and large resolutions, the 128GB version is going to be a nice boost for you. And it's going to be a little bit future-proofing you to the future workflows, but that's another point that we'll get to in a minute. I would say in Premiere Pro, you can see a difference in there, but at the same time, the 48GB version is plenty for 99% of the people as well. In my workflow, what we're doing here and the content that we're creating for you, I can see more than 48GB used and utilized. So I would say for me, the 128GB version is worth it. And if you've seen the benchmarks on the channel between the M4 Max and maybe some of the PCs, I'd like to say that go check out the live stream when we actually tested these codecs, because there you can see that there's so much more to it than just the benchmarks. I would say that the benchmarks are favoring actually PCs rather than this Mac, because the actual editing performance, just go check it out, and I'm gonna say ridiculous probably like 1,000 times. Moving on to After Effects, and there I would say yes, 128GB is a good upgrade for you. The way After Effects works is it likes to cache a lot of the preview on RAM. So the more RAM you have, the more smoother playback you're going to be seeing. When you're rendering it, it's going to be faster. It's going to just work better. This is an absolute beast for After Effects. And if you look at the performance benchmarks compared to the 14900K, as you can see, or 285K Ultra 9 from Intel, the brand new one, then this M4 Max is about 17, 18, 19% faster than the PC with RTX 4090. Now, this is the benchmark that I didn't actually show you in the full benchmark reviews where we talked about, Photoshop and all the other ones, M4 Max versus PCs. If you haven't seen that video, go check that one out. It's very popular. But now running the After Effects benchmark on these as well, this guy is just insane. And I would say if your workflow includes a lot of After Effects, then 128GB, that's a good upgrade for you. Davinci Resolve, I would say for most people, no, you don't need that. Davinci Resolve is very, very efficient in utilizing the RAM. It likes to use a lot of VRAM. In this case, it is unified, so it's VRAM and the CPU RAM both together. It's unified memory. I'd still say that for most people, you're probably not going to be running out 48GB for Davinci Resolve, and 128GB is not worth it for you. For you who's getting an 8TB upgrade, for example, for your SSD, money is not an obstacle for you, so you just get the 128GB as well, and then Bob's your uncle. Just move on and, see you in another year with the M5 Max maxed out. I guess you're going to be that guy, right? And then there's the 3D workflow. Now, in certain applications that are supported on Apple Silicon for the 3D workflow, like Redshift and Cinema 4D for After Effects and Blender as well, the RAM can be very, very good upgrade for you. You probably need that, especially working with Blender, because it's a VRAM and CPU RAM. When you're rendering it out, it's going to be super, super helpful for you. At the same time, if you're running the benchmarks, no difference. Bear in mind, before purchasing the laptop, make sure that your 3D program is supported on Apple Silicon, because still most of the 3D programs and workflows out there are still supported on NVIDIA and has the best performance on video. So perhaps going with a Windows laptop is a better option for you. Now, second very important reason why you might want to upgrade from 48 to 128GB is the multitasking. When you're the type of person like I am, I've got Lightroom open, I've got Photoshop open, I'm rendering something in Media Encoder while editing something in Premiere Pro, having lots of tabs open in Chrome and transferring some files across to the server, doing lots of different things, then the 128GB is worth it for you. Having more RAM just enables you to have multiple things open and you don't need to worry about it. Mac OS is very good at caching some of this on your SSD and making it run very, very fast. Having more RAM will just give you faster operating system speed because it doesn't need to cache it somewhere. It's just going to store a lot of the random memory on the RAM, and you're just going to have faster experience when doing lots of multitasking. Especially if you are running like a dock like this. We have Davinci here. If you haven't seen that video out yet, go check out our desk setup here. When I'm having multiple monitors and you're having multiple things open at the same time, 128GB and having more RAM will become helpful for you. So if you are a heavy multitasker, then maybe the $1,000 is worth it. At the same time, there is no measurable performance gain going to the 128GB, so bear that in mind. Reason number 3 is the SSD health. Now, let me explain this one. The way Mac OS works is when you're used all your RAM on the 48 gigabyte version, and then you open another program, for example, it's actually going to swap some of this random, memory that it needs to store a RAM to the SSD. So it's going to write it to the SSD, then empty the RAM, and then you can open another program, another 100,000 Chrome tabs and so on, right? And then it works like that all the time. As long as your RAM is full, it's just going to push some things on the SSD. When you go back to that program, it's going to read it from SSD and then push it back to the SSD. So it's using the SSD a lot to just, if you're running out of memory, it just uses the SSD for that. Now the thing is, SSDs have a health or lifespan, which means the SSD can be written over X amount of times. Usually the industry standard is that you can write over a 1 terabyte SSD 600 terabytes. So once that 600 terabytes has been written on the SSD, you're going to start to lose SSD health, which means you either lose the capacity or the SSD can literally just go kaboom. So if you look at the M.2 SSDs that we have on the PC side, Samsung 990 Pro, for example, Western Digital SN850X, they have 600 terabytes per 1 terabyte SSD. So when you're upgrading your RAM for 48 gigabytes to 128 gigabytes, there's more space for the operating system to push things on the RAM and not swap it with the SSD, which means that your laptop's gonna last longer, especially if you haven't upgraded the SSD and you're thinking, I'm gonna go with the 1 terabyte SSD and then figure out some external storage options just because I don't want to pay the Apple tax on the ridiculously overpriced Apple storage. If you want to know how to do that, then go check out my video. I've got a full guide of different levels of external storage, what you can do with your Apple storage and actually save money and get something so much more for your money in terms of storage. And I'm actually gonna say, please don't upgrade the Apple storage because it's so overpriced. So by upgrading to 128 gigabytes, you're actually gonna make your SSD last longer. And last reason is the future proof. This CPU and GPU on these M4 Max, they're absolutely insane. Like the performance is absolutely ridiculous. And the only thing that I can see it slow down in the future in a couple of years time is the RAM capacity, because we're making more and more software that likes to use more RAM and uses more RAM and uses more things, which means that if you want to future-proof your workflow, whether video, photo, 3D, whatever you're doing, then having 128 gigabytes is actually worth it. There are people out there who don't want to wonder all the time, is there a better upgrade available? Should it have upgraded to more SSD? Should I have upgraded more RAM? Should I have upgraded more? They just go max out everything, buy it, and then don't think about it for 5 years. If that is you, it's probably a good idea, especially if you can write this off on business expenses. But there is one downside now which I want to talk about as well, which is the discounts available. Now, if you're thinking about buying the base model, the 48 gigabytes, and you're thinking, do you know what? I don't actually need more RAM, then go check out my links in the video description below, because on Amazon, you can get it for already cheaper than what Apple offers. So the base models, there's lots of discounts available. Amazon's got very good discounts available, especially now during Black Fridays and holiday season. You might find it even more of a deal out there. As soon as you start upgrading the M4 Max, there's no upgrades available, because those upgrades are only available from Apple. Because to me, it feels like when you want to upgrade the SSD or the RAM, Apple literally custom makes the laptop for you. They just screw in and solder in that much RAM and then send it to you, which is, interesting. It's not just like pop in, take the cover off, pop some in. You actually have to like take off, solder some stuff in and so on, blah. And maybe that's why they can't offer the discounts for there, but the base models will have discounts. Check them out in the video description below. Now, hopefully that was helpful for you. I would love to know your take on this in the comment section below, so we'll meet you down there. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.